And I think, like being challenged over and over makes you build resiliency and makes you build your coping mechanisms. And for so long, laughter or making jokes or those kinds of things were my coping mechanism. And then when I finally realized what I was doing with it, it was like, oh, that's okay for a time. But then once we know better, we need to do better, right?
Hello and welcome into Lessons from Living. I am your host, Beth Graham, and I am grateful you have taken the time to join us today. I was thinking this morning, I have been doing this podcast for a long time now. I believe this is our 80th episode that we're recording today. God has given us a unique seat to be able to witness the divinity in people. And what I mean by that is that in becoming aware of the stories that people share, the trials and adversities that they have experienced, we see how those experiences have shaped them into people who God is able to use for his kingdom work. It's pretty cool. Well, Jenna Udenberg is one of those people. She has been through a lot. And yet she uses the way that God has honed her to act and change the world for the better. I'm so grateful to have met her and grateful to be able to share this conversation with you today. Welcome, Jenna. Well, hello, Jenna, and welcome to Lessons from Living. We're so excited to have you with us today.
Good morning, Beth. It's so great to be here.
Yeah. Well, we're excited to learn from you, and we're gonna go back in time a little bit, if that's okay with you. I understand that you were just 7 years old when you found out that you had juvenile idiopathic arthritis. Did I say it right?
You did. Perfect.
Okay.
Yes.
And for those of us who are unfamiliar with this disease, can you tell us a little bit about it and how it progressed for you?
Yeah, so for most folks, it's just like the arthritis that folks get as they age, right? That's what I was told as a child. And as a kid, it was actually called juvenile rheumatoid arthritis at the time, but probably in the last like 8 to 10 years, they finally figured out that it doesn't follow the rheumatoid disease progress, which I'm like, oh, I could have told you that, because the medical world always said A plus B equals C, and my body would be like Q times the square root of R times the cube of S might give you a T and not a C. So I always challenge their brains, especially back in that time of the late 80s. But yeah, and so yes, it's different than osteoarthritis. It does have more of the inflammation, joint damage, those kinds of aspects of it. But also the Arthritis Foundation had a big campaign in the 90s, early 2000s of kids get arthritis too. So sometimes you don't hear the idiopathic part in it. A lot of people just say I have juvenile arthritis. And also in recent years, I've had some providers say, well, you are in your 40s, so how about we get rid of the word juvenile? And I'm like, nope, I have earned that badge
Yes,
of
ma'am.
honor for decades, and that's going to stay there because you can also be diagnosed with juvenile arthritis. I think it's up until like age 32, and that criteria may have changed. But I want providers, especially in emergency room situations, that kind of stuff, to be like, oh, this is long term. This is a big deal. Let's look for all the different scars she might have on her body from all the different 16 to 18 surgeries I've had, and just all the different medical things that are there. So yeah, but for how it presented in me as a child, the family story goes that we as a family were out ice skating in a city flooded rink, and I had a fall the night before. And I don't really remember that except for the family story side of it. I do have memories of the next day. I was in first grade, so I was just 7 years old, getting ready for first grade in a bubble bath, and my right knee floated to the top through the bubbles. And it was like 2 to 3 times the size of my other knee. So I did what any little 7-year-old girl does, is I screamed for mommy, because moms always make life better, right? They're supposed to be able to fix everything. Which led to them taking me to the local clinic, and we're in rural Minnesota. And so I had to see the doctor that was my labor and delivery doctor. And he's just like, well, you look like you have water on the knee. And my dad was a volunteer ambulance driver back in the 70s and early 80s. And he was like, my daughter's not a star athlete. She did not get water on the knee. There's something else going on. So at that time, we had another doctor clinic in our small town, and we were able to get a second opinion. And he kind of took one look at my knee, one look at my lab results, and was like, I'm pretty sure you have juvenile rheumatoid arthritis, but I can't diagnose you with that. You need to go to the next bigger city, which is Duluth, Minnesota, kind of at the arrowhead of Lake Superior on a map. And that rheumatologist took one look at me and said, yep, by the x-rays and the blood work and just seeing you, I'm pretty sure you have this. However, that was the same time of life that Lyme's disease, the tick-borne illness, was coming on the scene. And a lot of the symptoms were the same: inflammation, swollen joints, red, all the things, heat. So I had to go down to the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota to have my final official diagnosis a month or two later. And that was kind of a very scary situation, just being around, bigger clinics, doctors that spoke English as a second language. And I just thought, because of all the medical jargon, right? But the amazing accents from around the world and trying to cut through the medical jargon and the accents was hard as a kid. And my biggest things is I remember ooh, this guy is good. He gave me a sticker or a sucker. Oh, this guy is bad. He made my parents cry or get all teary-eyed. That was kind of my thing. And also my most vivid memory there was a radiologist technician got in my face because I had to do a barium x-ray or whatever the right terminology was. And I wasn't drinking the barium cocktail fast enough. Shocker, little 7-8-year-old having to do really gross things. And he got in my face because I wasn't doing it fast enough and I was putting him behind schedule. Well, then he got to meet my dad. And you don't want to meet the dads of hurting little girls. So, yeah, so those are kind of my only big, memories of that time frame. And later on in life, I found out from my doctors that, I had a really aggressive start to my disease because I was in a wheelchair by age 8. So within a year or less, the disease went from my right knee to my left ankle to my right hip. And so it was kind of like playing Jenga and Tetris and Jumanji all at the same time in my body, and trying different medications and then dealing with the side effects and having to rent wheelchairs. But pediatric wheelchairs weren't a thing back in the late 80s either. They had some, but it's not like today and the different amazing devices that we have for people to use.
Yeah. So idiopathic, that means they don't know where it comes from. Is that right?
Yeah, and they don't really know that it follows a specific disease cycle either.
Okay.
So
you talk about childhood trauma and how sometimes that has to be addressed by mental or medical health professionals, sometimes prayer. Can you explain what part of experiencing disease like this as a child, such a tender age, leads to trauma like that, and how you personally dealt with that?
Yeah. I always say that I'm very blessed to get my diagnosis of my disability as a child. And a lot of non-disabled folks just shake their head when I say that. But as a child, I didn't know any different, right? I still have memories of running and doing cartwheels and playing in pools and doing all the things I can do in a modified way now, but not like a little kid, right? I remember building snow forts and getting cold and doing all the typical tomboy type activities, being in rugged northern Minnesota.
Yeah.
But yeah, and at that time I didn't know it was trauma, right? I just knew this is hard stuff.
Right.
Also growing up in the Scandinavian culture, stuff it down. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Make lemonade out of lemons. Oh, you want your favorite food? That's a comfort. I'm going to give you food as your comfort instead of, that hug or that, whatever thing it might be, or sitting and praying or, whatever it is. And I say all those things in no fault to any of my loved ones or any of my medical providers. That's just what we knew at that time.
Right.
And so as I've aged, as I've embraced becoming a disability activist, advocate, whichever term you want to use, becoming an accessibility educator, I'm learning more about the things that happened. And as somebody who wants to be a healthier person, as somebody who wants to be a healthier community leader, as somebody who wants to be a healthier version of myself, to promote healthy choices in others, I've had to look in some really hard mirrors. I've had to look into, what was that thing? And maybe it wasn't as big a deal then, but because I didn't have those coping mechanisms as a child, because I didn't have that knowledge. I knew it didn't feel good. I knew I put up walls. I knew there was all those things that we do when we don't feel safe, when we don't feel comfortable, when we don't feel seen or heard. Mm-hmm. So I'm trying to unlearn things, even in my mid-40s, of like, oh, I don't need to do that. That's not healthy, or that's not the way in my belief system that I want to live this life out. And so I want to do that harder work, that digging into some of those spaces. And then there's other parts where I'm like, other people will ask me some of those questions, and I'm like, you know what? For me personally, it's like the grace of God has just taken those things away. And he said, this is mine to have of your story. This isn't to impact you anymore, or this wasn't for you. And so I'm very thankful for that. And yet I also, when I am doing my work, it's like, I also can't expect that other people have that experience. And so just because this is my experience and my belief system and my way of life, that's mine, right? So let's have curious questions. Let's have these deeper conversations to figure out, you know, how do we work together to make sure we're in a healthier community.
Yes. Well said. Well, that's interesting what you said about the Scandinavian community, because I know you didn't mention your parents a whole lot, but as tough as you are, I was thinking there couldn't have been a whole lot of coddling going on here, you know. I think parents today are so afraid to let their kids fail, much less suffer, you know. And so it's interesting to you are one tough cookie, that is a parent.
Yeah, and I think, you know, like being challenged over and over makes you build resiliency. It makes you build your coping mechanisms. And for so long, you know, laughter or making jokes or those kinds of things were my coping mechanism. And then when I finally realized what I was doing with it, it was like, oh, that's okay for a time, but then once we know better, we need to do better, right? And so now it's so much more freeing to be like, if I'm sad or I'm hurting, it's okay to cry. Like, I didn't find my tear ducts probably legitly until college. And then my older sisters would be like, what happened to you? Like, I'm sure hormones had something to do with it as well, right? But, you know, now I can fully belly laugh about things. And it's not that putting up a wall of dealing with these things. It's like authentic, right? But then also authentically crying and authentically just being connected to all of those experiences and those emotions, and that they're not, sometimes they can be big and scary.
Yeah.
But they're actually just an indicator of things we've gone through or are going through.
Okay. Well, you mentioned that children who go through something like this struggle in navigating with a life with their peers, because it's just hard for you to understand where the other is coming from and what your worlds are like. And yet it sounds like even at a very young age, you were able to foster friendships. And I want to get into the friendships in depth in a minute, but why do you think that was possible for you at such a tender age?
I think just my placement in my family also helped. You know, I'm the baby of 4, and my brother is 16 years older, and then my 2 sisters are 15 and 12 years older. So in some ways, I'm the baby of the family. Sometimes I'm an only child. So that just presented itself differently. Also, generally, a lot of my mom's friends when I was growing up were more of like adopted grandmas to me. So even her role modeling in my life was, you can have friends of all different generations. And that was interesting when I look back and have conversations with my siblings or even my parents, because they're both still living, is like, wait, you guys used to have game nights? Well, yeah, before you came along or before you got sick. And I'd be like, oh, you had friends like your age? Because I just never saw that, right? Because our lives completely did a 180 once I became disabled and had medical conditions. So I think it's in the environment, right? Nature versus nurture. I think it is in the community in which you're brought up in. Like I typically just see people for people. Like being in a small town, you know, you have that whole like, oh, you're a townie because you were born here and you have ancestors in the graveyard. You know, if you haven't lived here for 4 decades and you don't have anybody in the graveyard, then you're not from here, kind of a mentality, which I never knew about until I came into community leadership. And so I don't agree with that. I don't see life that way. It's like, oh, you've lived here forever because that's my forever. So therefore you're a part of these things. And I would say, like in high school especially, I was able to go in between all the different peer groups, right? Like I could be a band geek in one situation. I could be over here being a church kid in another situation. I could go over here and be with the jocks. I could go over here and be with the academics. Like there are just so many different facets to my personality, to my gifts and talents, to just being, right? We all just want to belong. We all just want to be. And me and my friend group were also known to be like, hey, there's a new kid coming. Hey, Jenna or so-and-so and so-and-so, would you... And a lot of times they didn't even have to ask us, right? We see the kids sitting alone and be like, hey, you must be new here. You want to have lunch together? So, you know, which is different because now that I know I'm an introvert, there are just different aspects. They're like, oh, okay. So, yeah.
Wow. Okay. You said it's at 13 you joined a wheelchair basketball team and that was really the first time when you realized I'm living in 2 worlds here. I'm living in 2 cultures. What was it about that experience that kind of cemented that for you?
You know, when you are always the shortest person and you are always the poster child of needing help, when you're in a non-disabled community, and then you go in, you wheel into a gym and you're all the same height. And your bodies still function a little bit differently, but in a general sense, it's similar. It was very, I'm trying to think of like a good adjective, but it was very jarring, right? Like when you go from being a majority person to a minority person. And then also it was like that whole rural versus city, right? Because we'd have to travel down to Duluth to be a part of this. So then you saw all of these disabled folks my age and a little bit older and a couple younger that all knew each other because they were all a part of this organization. So then I had that, I'm a newbie, I want to be a wallflower, I'm an introvert, I just want to sit here and absorb all the things and just watch for a while before getting comfortable. So I was very thankful for my great friend Jamie, because she's really my disability mentor, and she knew all those folks, right? So she was like my bridge. So I'd go and hide behind her to be like, I'm just going to go listen to your conversation with this person. I'm going to go have some imposter syndrome and sit over here for a little while. But in hindsight, it was like, wow, it was, using today's words, right? It was representation. I had never seen other people that looked like me living out life like me. Now, were there other disabled students in my small community? For sure. Did all of them have the same abilities? No, because I was, at that time, the only person in band that had a disability in a physical sense. You know, so it just, your different abilities and disabilities just change that perspective. And that's where I ran into a lot of discrimination from teachers and other adults and different systems, because I didn't make the cookie cutter definition for them of what being a disabled student was. You use a special bus, you sit in a special room, you are not seen, you are not heard, and maybe every once in a while you get to come out for one class to sit at a special table that is completely away from your peers, and you aren't allowed to talk to them and they aren't allowed to talk to you, but we say that it's inclusion and we say that it's all these things. And that was a generation of education that I started to grow up in.
Yeah, it's terrible.
Right.
You became involved in music, and as you said, in the band, and you had a band director, Fitz.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to say this wrong. Is it Chime?
Oh, Churney.
Churney. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Didn't see. Okay, they are.
Yeah.
And you said that they saw things in you pointed things out in you that you didn't even know that you had. What
Yeah.
kinds of things are you talking about? And explain the impact on your life. I'm just always fascinated by how teachers can make a difference in a kid's life with a word, you know?
Right. Or just an action or a look,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Yeah, so some context is our band room was down a flight of stairs, and for me, I had to go in the back entry. So you would see all of the teachers coming out of the teachers lounge, which was a half a flight above those spaces. And, dark catacombs because the school was built like in the 1940s. So I would use a track chair that I would have to get attached to, and then a para, which was my only connection or need from the special education world, was to get this physical access to the band room. And I was in band and jazz band. So twice a day, I would have to go through this torture, being, lifted up at the edge of the stairs, kind of on something that looks like part army tank, but rubberized treads. And then if the paraprofessional wasn't able to get it exactly lined up, every third step, the whole thing would jolt. And so, you do that for a flight of steps 4 times a day, there's a lot of things that can happen. So then once I'd get down to the band room, then I was like, oh, you're the lead trumpet player, because my 8th grade band director, Fitz, and then my 9th grade director, Cherney, saw that leadership skill in me, saw that musical intent in me. Mm-hmm. And so they're like, you're playing on your sister's old cornet. You really need a real trumpet. So then I saved all my pennies and I went to the music store in the next big town and bought my shiny silver trumpet, and nobody else had a silver trumpet, and all the different mutes and all the different gear. And, and that they would instill in me and invest in me to take on those leadership roles at a very young age. And then it was funny because at one time Fitz was like, so you're kind of here, but like play this, sight read this for me. And I couldn't do it. So she really diagnosed the fact, like, Jenna, you've got the chops, as we say, right? You got the face, you got the air, you got all the things, but your rhythm is just beyond. And I was like, oh, I'm just listening to others and leading the way, but I'm actually cheating by taking knowledge from others. Okay. But, then the biggest thing was like watching them very minimally, but knowing that I was there, that they were fighting this undercurrent within the staff of like, we can no longer do this. So going over to the medical hat at this time in my life, my knees were super painful. And so I'm like, they are not good. And I came home from school one day and I'm like, Mom, it's a miracle. I can move my knees. I don't have pain. I don't need to go see this surgeon. I don't need to go in for the surgery to do an arthroscopy and scrape out all the arthritis and swelling and all this. Like, we're good. It's a miracle. I'm good. And so the medical doctors were like, no, we still need to put you out. We still need to see what's going on. And after they put me out, they're like, you actually have hairline fractures in your femurs and you created your own knees. My knees at the time were completely fused by the arthritis. And I actually broke my femurs, and that is where I was moving. And that's where I thought I had my miracle and that the pain was gone and I didn't have to have surgery. Well, at age 15, I started having to have total knee replacements. And so at that time, then the school district had a pivot and they had to move our band room over to the elementary school. And that's where I really faced the discrimination from certain teachers of why do we have to change our whole schedule for this one kid? Mm-hmm. Why do we as core teachers have to change our schedule that we've had for years because of band? That's an elective. We are more important. They are not. And so watching my band directors navigate that, as well as the fact, like, our school district only had one school bus that was accessible at the time. So once you get to high school and you do solo ensemble contests, and you do honor bands and honor jazz bands, and you have all these other events during the school day or otherwise, the district's like, we can't send you with the one bus, because what if we have an emergency and we have to get everybody out of a school? Or whatever their justification at the time was. So my middle school band director, Fitz, would just be like, all right, well, we're going to use my car. In this day and age, liability and stuff, that would never, ever, ever happen. But back in that time, and she didn't have to, right? She was no longer my teacher because she was middle school and now I'm in high school. And so it just forged amazing relationships. And, you know, they really became like my band parents, in all honesty. Like, because my family was, my older sister and sisters were a little musical, but my parents were not at all. And so it was just like, you know, they supported me, obviously, but to understand the cool different terminologies and the experiences and what it meant to be a, you know, 5-star rating at state or those kinds of things. So, and we're still, you know, very good friends to this day of, you know, we've got each other's backs. And sometimes I'm sure if she, especially Fitz, if she hears this, she'll be like, Jenna, stop talking about me. But too bad, you're part of the story and a very important part, because I would have not gone into music education had they not inspired me, because they saw me. They saw the whole kid. They didn't see, and they weren't intimidated by the needs that came along with this vessel of mine.
Wow, that's amazing. You said at 15, you had so many instances of, well, I know you were getting into the place where you were about to have surgery and all, and you said you were a mess mentally, emotionally, and it coincided with a lot of pain from your disease. You had a dog, Blackie, who was going through their own little situation.
Yep.
Explain how that Blackie situation kind of led you to consider, oh, do I have an out? Do I want an out here?
Right. Yeah. So, you know, I was such an original 5-year-old when it came to naming my black lab. So that's who Blackie is, if you need a mental picture. And so he ended up having arthritis, and he ended up having a cancerous tumor on his nose that we ended up having taken off a few times, and then it was just pointless. And so his quality of life was horrible. He wasn't a true dog anymore. He wasn't, you know, his tail was still wagging, but not an amazing quality of life. And so, you know, as different scenarios happened and we needed to put him down, it was like, I'm laying here in this bed. At that time, I was bedbound. At that time, I was like, what is the point to all of this, right? Like, this, yeah, I got nothing left. I can't make lemonades out of this. This is like, this is worse than lemons. This is like limes and like moldy oranges or something, right? Like, this is bad. And, yeah, so I wanted to end it all. And so I had a plan. I actually had 2 plans. I was going to save up as much medication as I could. And then, you know, hindsight later on, looking back, I'm like, Jenny, you weren't really on that much of amazing things that would take you out pretty quickly. So it probably wouldn't have done the job anyways, but who knows, right? And then my backup plan, if that wasn't to work, I would figure out how I would throw myself down our flight of stairs. We were split entry, so those stairs and then the stairs to the basement. And somehow log roll all the way over to my dad's gun cabinet, and somehow climb all the way to the top of it to get the key, right? To then figure out how to load it and do all those things, right? So in hindsight, I can laugh about it because it's just not logical. Like, all those things wouldn't have happened. They couldn't have happened, right? But in no way am I making light of what it was like in that moment, and what desperation there was. Yeah. And in that time, it was 1995, and the Oklahoma City bombing happened a couple days after. I remember looking up, I had it wasn't a portrait of Blackie, but it was a portrait of a black lab. And I remember looking up at that when he was put to sleep. And it was like, my soul just cried out. Like, I know that I'm created for a purpose and a plan. And I know that I've served the Lord that I knew at that time. And that's the place that I wanted to come back to and be a part of. And that I couldn't do it alone, right? Mm-hmm. Like, there's no way that I can get myself out of these painful spaces and places without something greater than me, than my family, than all the things. And so up to that point, anytime the phone would ring, I would quickly like flip my body over and pretend I was sleeping. Well, this day, my mom ended up catching me. And she's like, you are talking to your friend. I am not going to let you blah, 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 right? And so then my friend called and said, hey, just need to let you know, somebody that's important in your life had a house fire. They're okay. But, you know, they lost this, they lost that, they lost this, they lost that. And I was like, I have to get back to school. I need to see with my own eyes and my own heart and my own spirit that this person is truly okay. And be there for them if they're not, and be them for them if they are, right? And so that was really the impetus that got me moving forward, because at that point, then it stopped being about me. There was other hope. There was other light. There was other purpose, right? And the only reason I mentioned Oklahoma City bombing is that happened, I believe it was like the day or two after. And so that's just kind of my stones of memory, right? Like that's my marks of memory of life, and how I celebrate that time and that time of overcoming.
Yeah. Well, you know, I want to better understand the kind of pain, because I know you mentioned physical, mental, relational, and spiritual pain that you just wanted to stop. And I mean, if you just look at the physical pain, I'm trying to relate, but but there's just no way. I know. I mean, I've had 6 babies.
Wow.
Some of them have been naturally, but that's, yeah, okay. And then I've been, you know, I've been hospitalized for migraines. But, you know, in both of those instances, you know it's going to end. It will end. And to me, the incessant nature of, you know, ongoing pain is a different story. Can you just speak to that?
Yeah, you know, chronic pain, it can take you out for a while. So in dealing with the chronic pain, sometimes it's not even just the pain that you're dealing with, it's also dealing with the brain fog that it causes, dealing with the medications that you need to take and all of their different side effects. And then also, like I was saying before, in some instances, I feel like that's where, for me, I feel like that's where the hand of God has just come and taken a lot of those memories away. Like, yes, I know I was in pain. I knew that my brain easily adapted to, like, I'm going to guard you. And so now I have all these restrictions in my soft tissues because that was my body's response of, you're sore, I'm going to protect you. And then the rest of the body gets screwed up because it's trying to protect that, you know, hurting area. Well, then, like I said earlier, with having the Tetris, Jumanji, and Jenga parts to my story, it's like, oh, I'm guarding over here today because my right hip is sore. But now that made my left hip sore. So now I'm going to try to compensate for that. Oh, but now my shoulder is sore. So you just become one thing to the next to the next. And it's so hard, especially for listeners that are going through any chronic pain scenarios. Then you add the medical world into it. And it's like, well, either you have to suck it up, or otherwise they say it's a mental thing, or they say it's a spiritual thing, or they say, well, you know, just be happy, right? Just smile. Just go and volunteer and do something for someone else. And it's like, yes, I understand the intent of that. And yes, there is a kernel of truth in everything that I just said, but you have to figure out what's that next right step in untangling this big ball of yarn called chronic pain and chronic illness, to figure out what is going to help it. And sometimes doing that next healthy thing is going to make the whole rest of your systems miserable and even harder than it already is. But it's finding that support system and that unction to just be like, this is it, and I'm going to stick with it for the next 2 weeks, because there is going to be light at the end of that tunnel if I just stick to it. And maybe there's not, but then you're going to know that that's not the string to pull, and that's not the torture to put yourself through to try to fix that next thing.
At 16, then, you began surgeries. And that's a whole other thing. It's necessary with this disease, sounds like, but it's a double-edged sword.
Right.
Explain why.
Yeah, so we were warned very early in my diagnosis that once I started surgeries, I'd have to continue. And so, yes, there were people that wanted my parents to start doing surgeries on me at like age 8. And we took that warning from that physical therapist very seriously, and we're like, no. And so then when I finally got my orthopedic surgeon, he's like, yep, we have to wait until your bone or your growth plates are closed. Or if something becomes catastrophic, then yes, absolutely, we have to do it. But by age 16, so that was when I had said earlier about the finding the femurs that had hairline fractures. And at that point, they just couldn't leave me alone. And so I had to start with knee replacements. And so the hardest part in that whole journey was like, all right, so we replaced the right knee because it's the worst, but we can't leave the left knee hanging out for too long. So like 6 months later, I had the other one replaced. And for me, rehabbing from knee replacements are the hardest of all the replacements I've had. I'm not going to sugarcoat it for anybody considering that joint replacement. But yet for me, as a wheeled person, it is probably easier than a walking person in some aspects. And in other aspects, it's harder because I'm dealing with all of the other soft tissue residual things, as well as all of the joints below and above the knee that are impacted by my disease. So once you start cutting, you have to continually cut. And so it was like less than a year after the left knee, I had to have my hip replaced. And then, we found out that people are getting poisoning from the hips because the little shards of metal were coming off. So then I had to go in and have a hip a revision. So they could take off the ball and put in a porcelain head and put in a marathon runner lining that's, I think at that time was rubberized. And then it was like, your growth plates were closed, but now you have osteoporosis because you haven't been standing since age 7. So the lower leg bones had crushed down and the femur had went up. And now I had all this extra joint space. So the plastic tray in the knee was flipping around and doing bad things. And so then it's like, now let's have a revision on this knee. Oh, just kidding. No, your other knee is doing the same thing. And so I lose count. I literally have to count the scars on my body. But I think from age 16 to age 22, I had like 8 surgeries, 8 or 9. And all orthopedic, all chasing the tail of, fixing this thing to fix that thing to fix this thing. And none of the surgeries ever able to be fully healed before going into the rehab world for the next thing. So, yeah, high school and college were rough times in that sense.
Yeah, I appreciate you going through all that because I think it just really gives us some context and some background to who you are as an individual, and it's really helpful. But let's talk about some happier things.
Yes.
I know you talked about your first job at 16 where you had the opportunity to work with kids younger than yourself and vice versa. And it sounded like having a real relationship with these kids, exposing a person like yourself to them it was good for both of you.
Yeah.
That's the sense I get.
Yep.
It made me think that there's so much good in fostering these kinds of opportunities, especially among young people. I think the word you used was empathy. Develop sympathy in children. Do you think that there are ways to provide for opportunities to that, like that today, societally?
I think we need more of it. I don't know in our current society in how divisive and all that we are currently, how to safely do that. But I think we definitely can. And I think we have to be intentional and set up good guardrails of what that looks like. And I feel like, especially after being a public school educator, like we just need to sit back as adults sometimes and just watch kids. Especially the, I don't want to say it this way, but I'm going to, like, the good-hearted, kind-spirited kids that just flow in between. And, like, they don't, like, of course, kids see difference, but they don't see difference the way we as adults do. They don't assign good versus bad. They don't assign all these things. And it's like, if we could just get back to that innocence, get back to not making those assumptions and being judgy or judgmental. And, so I love when little kids will come up and ask me questions. And it's so funny to watch the parents or grandparents or the adults with the kid. Oh, we don't say that. We don't ask that. What are you doing? Stop that. And it's like, no, can we as adults just get over ourselves And understand that, some people are in different aspects of their disability journey, right? I'm a veteran. I've been doing this for 38 years now, and I'm an educator. So I just have a different lens about it. And you're not going to know that if I'm just wheeling down the aisle at a store, right?
Sure.
But to have that conversation of yeah, you can ask me. Well, and especially for me, because I use my legs to propel my wheelchair. So for a lot of people, that just throws them off of what in the world? And it's yeah, I can't walk in that traditional sense, right? Yes, things function in a limited way or in different spaces. And so the more that we can be intergenerational, the more that we can embrace those spaces and just the fact that life is life. And disability is a natural part of that life, right? And so especially being in rural situations and being around more of the older population, and especially now with my, aging parents, I've been given the gift of adapting because I've had to from such a young age. Mm-hmm. And so now for Jamie and I, it's we have so many conversations of how do we take the lessons that are just so innate to us because of the cards that we've been dealt and the life story we've gotten to live, to help our non-disabled parents who are now experiencing disability entrance in a new way, or our community members, or when the pandemic happened, the world lost its mind because it never knew how to be isolated before. Yes. But guess what? The disability population, we've got the corner market on that. Mm-hmm. So that's where we struggled of we get how to do this, not at this grand scale of life, right? But there are so many treasures of lessons learned no matter what age we're in. And for me, in disability community and culture, we have the things called crip spoons. And so it's a good visual for all of us of hey, today I feel like I have the energy of 8 spoons, but it takes 4 for me to do all of my personal cares and eating and food prep and getting to and from doctors or robotics or, whatever the day is. So now I have 4 spoons left to do this advocacy work, or this podcast is going to take 2 spoons because it's, mm-hmm. It's not just the time that you and I are sharing together, but then it's that recovery time after of wow, I just shared my whole life in this time frame. And now how do I go and present myself in the world after this upheaval, right? And so for me, as a teacher especially, I would steal that energy from those little kids, right? Those little kids have way more energy. And especially middle schoolers, because they've got all those new hormones coming in and out. Right. So it's taking from those experiences that just fill your cup, right? They fill your cup with joy, or they fill your cup with other experiences and emotions to go and do that next thing.
Yeah. Okay. Well said. Well, I know we talked a little bit about friends and friendships, and that seems like that's very important to you. I know there was a point in your life, I thought this was really interesting, where you were developing all these amazing relationships, and you talked about having to figure out how to best express them just in a hug, being able to hug, to express love, to have touch with a human being. I hadn't really thought about this before, but when someone leans down to give someone in a wheelchair a hug, what do you get? Shoulders? It's not right. Good, probably.
Glasses in the face.
Okay. So how did you navigate that? Because I know that was important to you.
Yeah, so I had the impetus of wanting to give a special person in my life a way of just saying, hey, thanks. I'm how about I can do a standing hug? Because now I can stand. And then all of the stuff is out of the way, right? Yes. And so in my book, you'll see read the story of being in physical therapy. And my therapist kind of looked at me wait, your goal for this year is you want to stand and hug. Yep. Oh. And so she's all right, that's a cool goal. That would meet insurance qualifications, right? And the first time I sort of laughed, so we were in a dining room in the physical therapy setting, and so I used the table to, stand up, and then she's all right, well then hug me. I'm okay, well this feels really weird, but okay. And so I was all right, and I literally put my hands on her shoulders, and I'm she's I feel like an awkward middle school boy. I'm I don't know how to do this. Like, I feel like Frankenstein, but, and then there's like 3 feet between us or 2 feet between us, right? So eventually I figured it out. But I also have my right arm that doesn't bend. I call it my hook. And that was the hook shot for wheelchair basketball. But that's always interesting to navigate with people too, because sometimes people will be like, oh, I'm just going to give you like a side hug, or I'm going to like only use one arm. And like for people that you're like, nope, like our hearts are intertwined, I'm giving you a two arm hug.
Yes.
And yeah, so it's just very, very interesting. And then later after that, right, like I tried to figure that kind of stuff out and had some success, but not always. Many of them are still very awkward. But now I do what I call seated hugs, right?
Okay.
So like when you just need that space, or somebody's grieving and I want to be that person to provide that comfort, or, because it's not always that people are doing that to me. That should be something we interchange together, two-way street. And I just recently finished a community leadership cohort, and so that was our thing, because we're like, wait, seated hugs, and we were virtual for most of it, but then our closing retreat was in person. And so the facilitator's like, if you feel comfortable, can you teach us all what a seated hug is? So as we each finished our thing, I'm like, all right, it's time for your Jenna hug. And then they'd all go to stand up. I'm like, sit down, and it is awkward for everyone, right? I can assume even for standing folks, it sometimes is awkward when you're coming into somebody else's bubble and space. And, do you do the cheek to cheek thing? Do you do the turn your head away thing? Do you do it's the same thing, but now for me, it's like, where does the arm go? Oh, that's weird, because now my arm would be on your backside. Let's not do that. So talking through the awkwardness to express what we need to express is always good.
That's great. I love that. I love the effort. The effort, Jenna, is amazing. So you said music became your passion and an integral part of your everyday life and identity. I could see how that was really important to you. I know I was diagnosed with cancer about 10 years ago, and it was really interesting how people wanted to associate me with that disease, and I was like, I don't want to be associated with that. That's the last thing I want to be associated with. So to have something that is true Jenna, and that you could focus on, what was that like to have a passion like that develop?
Yeah, I would say going all the way back even to like middle school, high school, it was just, that was my equal playing card, right? Like, with the exception of my right arm and having to learn how to play left-handed in 6th grade, and accommodate it in that sense, it was like, that's where I could be an equal with my peers. And so it wasn't based on physicality. It wasn't based on academics, even though that wasn't an issue for me. And it created those relationships, right? From trusting each other musically, having that sixth sense together to know, ooh, I can hear the lead sax going this way. All right, well, I'm the lead trumpet player, so I got to add into my arrogance, because that just has to happen when you're a lead trumpet player, especially in a jazz band situation, of like, all right, here you go, I have to follow, or I'm going, you need to follow. And so there's just something, borrowing the French saying of je ne sais quoi, like if you're not a musician, it's hard to describe it. But there's just a different intimacy of following each other and trusting each other and playing together or not playing together when you get to that level of musicality, of being able to have conversations. And you can really express yourself in maybe a lot of ways that you're afraid to with your words, or you're afraid to with your body. And so if that tool, that instrument, that voice, if you're singing, can get to a confidence place, you can learn a lot more about that person in that setting than maybe what they're willing to share verbally, or in words, or in emotion. And then also for me, especially once I got to college, and there weren't things like ramps up to risers, but I was a lead trumpet player, and you can't put the trumpet player down on the floor. You can't flip the acoustics of how those things play out. So I would have to trust my trumpet brothers and a few trumpet sisters, or the percussionists, and they would have to lift me in my chair up 3 feet in the air to get on risers. So it wasn't just that musical trust. It was like, my life is literally in your hands multiple times a day, making this accommodation so I can continue to be a part of your team, a part of your ensemble.
That is beautiful. I will never look at music the same way.
Right. Yeah.
After hearing that, that is amazing. Something that's really surprising to me about your story is that you were navigating your young life post American Disabilities Act, and yet you experienced equal access issues like you've talked about on a daily basis. And I don't know that much about that act, but it made me wonder, what was it supposed to address? And is there not any accountability for businesses or institutions that are non-compliant? Tell us about, I'm sure you know a lot about that.
Yeah, it is so weird to think, like, in my hat now as advocate and activist, and like doing more of the research and understanding more of the history now more as an adult than I ever have. I was like, wow, I was disabled before the Americans with Disabilities Act was even a thing, before it was law. Like, I am old, right? And yet, in the same respect, like, I always try to be more positive than negative, but I also don't feel that being true is being negative, even though a lot of times people can see that as negativity, being truthful about the facts in which we live.
Sure.
And so knowing that July is going to be the 36th anniversary of the passing of the Americans with Disabilities Act, we have so much farther to go. And, a lot of times going through the ADA, understanding all the code, understanding all the legalities, it's a lot. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. There's a lot there. And yet, to the point of your question, yeah, it's not like fire code that has a fire marshal.
Right.
It's not like, works in that law. Number one, it's the largest unfunded mandate the federal government has ever placed upon the American people. So if you don't have funding, how in the world do you change things? And then we have misbeliefs that these public places or these spaces are grandfathered in and therefore don't need to become compliant. And so there's just a lot of misinformation around all of these things. And then there's also the like, hey, why don't you go and change these codes? Why aren't these updated? Like, science has taken us, and the medical world has taken us twofold, right? And probably even morefold, right? I don't know the stats, but more people are living with disabilities now than have ever before. New medical conditions, advanced medical conditions. We have so much ability to live and thrive and be contributing members of society and just actually be living based on where we live now. And I love every aspect of that. However, government and laws and codes take forever to catch up, right? Like just looking at technology, right? And all the different lawsuits that are out there in technology that is relatively new to common people. So it literally takes an act of Congress to change any of the ADA codes. So that's why in the work with Above and Beyond with You, the nonprofit, it's like, we need to make those relationships with people who are living those everyday lives and are in charge of their own budgets, or in charge of their small business, or in charge of these places. And not come at it from a, hey, Beth, you're not in compliance. You deserve this fine. Well, do I want you spending that money on a fine that I don't even know where it goes? Or do I want you investing that money into correcting this wrong or this injustice or this barrier?
Yeah.
And so it's about being committed and not treating us as checklists. So how do we take these things that we know are good, that are beneficial, and it's also poking holes in our beliefs, right? We believe, by and large, that disabled people are poor. That's not always true. Yes, there is a large population of us that are at poverty or below because of systems, because of other harms. But when $42.3 billion a year is spent on the travel industry alone, just from the disability population, I can tell you there's a lot of businesses leaving money on the table because they're inaccessible. They don't know anything about that, right? We don't know what we don't know. So we need to raise awareness. We need people to come alongside and to foster that. And or people do these amazing things, but they don't promote it. So it's like, if you don't tell us, how can we come and experience it? And from my experience personally, as well as in this leadership role, is like the disability population is the most loyal in that. And it spreads like wildfire. If you feel safe in a space, you feel like you belong in a space, you feel like your voice is heard and your needs are met, you're going to return to that space every time. And you're going to tell anybody that's like you and or any loved ones of folks with disabilities, like, hey, you can actually use the bathroom at this at this coffee shop. Hey, they actually have a visual menu. So your, loved one that does more in pictures than in verbal can order what they want and know what they're getting, right? Like, making things universally designed and making things accessible helps everyone. And you don't have to have that label of disability if you see that that's a bad thing or a negative thing. But there's just so many scripts we have to change. And again, like, some people are like, well, then maybe we need to make a fire marshal of accessibility kind of a situation for that accountability. But it comes back to that same question I asked before.
Sure.
Where do those fines and that money go? And like, as somebody, when I travel, I need to get into hot tubs because I'm the one driving my conversion van. My legs need different things because I drive with my legs. And so often it's like, oh yeah, we have lifts into our hot tub. And then you get there and there's like A, no hot tub, or B, no lift, or there is a lift, but it hasn't been used in 3 years. Oh, but we just had it checked yesterday. So there's just so much misinformation out there. Yeah. So it really comes down to good promotion. And the other thing I'd say about that is, like, pictures and videos tell us a ton. Don't tell us in your words that something's 100% accessible, because that's not true. So just be honest in what you're providing and what is functional at that time. And then it's up to us to determine if that is accessible to us, if that is safe for us, and if that's a space that we can thrive in and want to be in.
You're an amazing advocate. You explain that very, very well. I know you received a Journey Award when you were very young, right? And it kind of sounded like that was the point where you said, I don't want anyone else in the community to go through what my family has gone through. And so you wanted to make a difference. Would you say that was the beginning of your advocacy journey there?
For sure. So in the Journey Award, it was a nomination by a PT and an OT at our local rehab. And they saw things in me, because the whole point at that time was you had to be advocating for others, leaving places and spaces better than where you found them. And it was interesting because at that time in my life, I was just out of college, just for working at my first job, dealing with all my medical stuff. And I felt like I was not doing anything for others. Like, I just had the blinders on, trying to self-advocate in the medical world, trying to keep my guardrails up, to do life. And so I think that's what made it such a huge pivot for me, is like, oh, these other people are seeing these things. Oh. And the flip side is, right, like, that I'm super thankful for, is like, sometimes in our human psychology, we shouldn't see, right? And even biblical, right? Like, the left hand shouldn't know what the right hand is doing. Right. So sometimes we just need to go and live and let that impact happen. And I think that's what they saw, right? They saw me self-advocating, which then changed systems, changed minds, changed the way that the medical system was applying that, which then changed how other disabled patients coming alongside of me and behind me, how that was changing. And so that really is what instigated my whole community leadership and self-development, right? And believing in myself that I'm worthy of being invested in by others and by myself. And how do we continue that growth?
Okay. And then you applied for and were granted a Bush Fellowship. What an honor. I know I'm trying to tighten this knot up and not make it so long for you, but can you tell us how that further shaped your advocacy?
Absolutely. There's so much even within the Bush Fellowship of 2020 to 2022. But believing in myself to self-nominate, right? The Journey Award was other people did these things, and then therefore I was just told. Where the Bush Fellowship was like, I believe in myself that I can do these things, and here's this process, right? And it was like 4 to 6 different steps of what that actually looked like. And the tagline for the Bush Fellowship is think bigger, think different. And I pushed myself in my application to be like, I'm going to travel. I have never flown because as a manual wheelchair user, over 100 wheelchairs are damaged or destroyed a day in the airline industry. And I can't take that chance. These are my legs. This is my freedom. This is my ability. And I was like, nope, I'm going to fly to these 5 different locations, very specifically picked out because I want to wheel where other wheels have wheeled. I want to see where my ancestors have gone before me and they have trailblazed. And I wouldn't have the life I have now without their sacrifice, without their work, without their being vulnerable and, living life. And I had heard for years that Sweden was the most accessible country in the world. And being that Sweden has very much not only cultural but also climate like things of Minnesota, I'm like, who better to go and learn from than people that it actually makes sense, and then the pandemic hit, right? So none of those things came to fruition, and yet on the backside of it, I was able to pivot and use that experience to create all of these online connections, to write my memoir, to become a published author, to start writing for our local paper. And all of these things that wouldn't have happened had I flown to UC Berkeley, had I flown to Sweden, had I flown to Florida. And so everything happens in its timing. Everything happens for a purpose and a reason. And having these connections and these new skill sets and going from the Bush Fellowship, in which invested in me, then led me to apply to be a 2025 Shannon Leadership Institute cohort member, where I paid to invest in me to take that next step of continually applying those learned lessons from my Bush Fellowship.
Okay. You obviously have a love for the outdoors. I can see how a wheelchair would present a lot of challenges where that is concerned.
Right.
But you figured out how to turn your wheelchair into an off-road vehicle. That's what I got from. I don't know. I don't understand all the details, but now you're doing things because you've been able to have that accessibility to get out more, and you're working for government and agencies. Tell us about all of that.
Yeah, so with my Bush Fellowship, I got to do a lot of online research, and I found Rio Mobility, which is based out in California, and they have something called the Firefly, which is an electric third wheel attachment. So my brother-in-law put the brackets on my manual chair, and then for me, with my hands and such, I get help putting it on. And so once it's on, I can go 15 to 17 miles per hour, depending if I'm going on my own or if I'm coasting down a paved trail. I have learned what state parks are. Like, how cool. What is this novel thing? I have yet to be at a national park, but that's somewhere on my bucket list of horizons. I've been on anything from limestone to gravel to all different kinds of crushed granites and other kinds of trails, let alone paved trails, and learned bike etiquette and found this amazing community. Like, when I am just in my chair in everyday life, I could probably count on a couple fingers how many people say hi to me when I'm out shopping. You put me in my Firefly and you put me on the trail. And not, very rarely, like maybe 1% of people don't look you in the eye. Everybody looks you in the eye. Everybody smiles. Everybody says, hey. And it's not that pity, hey, or whatever, but it's like, and sometimes I get it because it's like, whoa, you just came flying around that corner. And that was a wheelchair? what was that thing? So some of it's just that disarming of like, whoa, I didn't expect to see that here, kind of joy and conversation. But it's opened up a whole different community, so many new relationships and friendships and trail partnerships and that kind of stuff, let alone all the work with state agencies and other nonprofit organizations and such. But and there's a new thing out there called the Klaxon. So folks are looking at other opportunities that I'm looking at trying out. But my wheelchair provider was like, it's not going to be as fast as the Firefly. And I'm like, well, then I will be buying a second Firefly and using the Klaxon for indoor potentially. But
Wow. In following your story, it just seemed like as your accessibility increased, like you're describing, your life expanded and then your joy increased. You just seem to become more and more excited with all the possibilities before you. And that's a testimony to why this is so important.
yeah.
For sure. You talk about a deep faith that drives your perseverance in living life to the fullest while making an impact for the generations behind me. What role has your faith played in your life?
It's really at the core of who I am, right? I grew up primarily as a church rat, as I would say, a church mouse. Maybe that's better than a rat. Yeah, and I would say also in that, from I wouldn't say necessarily in childhood per se, because that was filled with a lot of inaccessibility, because churches by and large are older buildings and less accessible, at least back in the 80s and 90s. But especially in my college days, it like anybody's spiritual walk, life journey, whatever verbiage you want to use, there's those mountaintops and there are those plateaus and then there's those valleys. And so there's just a part of my spirit that just knows. It doesn't mean I'm living it out all the time. Doesn't mean that I'm, where I need to be at every moment. But there's always that nudging of the spirit bringing me back to like, this is where you're supposed to be, my child. And this is what you should be working on. And this is what's important. And this is where your identity is. So it doesn't matter how many other humans have this negative thought about you or these negative words about you, and they don't even know you more often than not, but they just have this negative connotation about disabled people or about trumpet players or about people wearing glasses or, like whatever it is that's making them think, that you're less than. It brings you back to like, no, I'm here for a reason. I'm here for a purpose. And there's something so much better outside of this is what gives me hope. Like these are barriers and obstacles for now. And in my own personal, journey of it, so often people are like, wow, you're going to run races in heaven all the time. I'm like, nope, I'm going to be sitting at the feet of my Savior. I don't care about these earthly interpretations of what others think of my body. But again, for me, my spiritual side, I know I'm wearing my nonprofit shirt. This isn't my nonprofit speaking. This is me as a human being speaking. I can't wait to kneel because I physically cannot kneel right now. So that is where folks will find me someday. And that's what I look forward to. So yeah. And for folks, it's like whatever that is for them is what I want to encourage them to find, right? And to not let go. The world may let go of us. The church made up of hurting people will definitely hurt us, but it's not the person who leads it. And so separating out the choices of other humans and the impacts, negative and positive, that they have on me has been a hard lesson to learn that isn't who I follow. And who ultimately loves me and who ultimately gives me my identity and my purpose and my joy.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Well, Jenna, we always end an episode by asking our guests to consider all of their life lessons that they might have developed over the course of many years and share with us if one rises to the top for you. I know we've talked about a lot of different things today, but is there one that you would say, this is the most important one to me?
I would say looking back holistically at my life, as well as, the recent decade of leadership training, is we are not created to do this alone. And so we have to build these relationships. We have to create safety and vulnerability. We have to understand that every single person has needs, and we're all called to be in community together, to be interdependent, to live this life. And no one person's needs are more special, hate that word, than someone else's. And pity is not serving anyone any good. And that curious questions go a lot farther in building that safety and vulnerability than continuing on with our biases, both seen and unconscious. And really doing the hard work of not being judgmental, but asking curious questions can change a relationship, can change a moment in time, can change our impact immensely.
That's amazing. Well, thank you for sharing that with us, Jenna. I know one of your quotes was, many times people with disabilities or medical issues are turned into other people's source of inspiration. In reality, we are just living the life we've been given. And I feel like, yes, this is what we did today. We are lifting you up. But you're going to have to give us grace.
For sure.
For that, because you are an inspiration. Right. And whether you want to be or not. And, when you consider where you began, just baseline, you started out with a tough hand of cards. And all of that aside, what you've been able to accomplish just for someone's life to be able to do what you're doing now, be the leader and the advocate that you are, and making the impact, changing the world like you've talked about wanting to see happen, is astonishing. So I hope it's okay for us to declare you an inspiration, my sister.
Yeah, and I would say, to add some context to that as well, is for us in disability culture and community, we hear it so often that, oh, you're so inspiring. And I would just add to it that it's like, well, what have we inspired you to do? Or how have we inspired you to be different or think different? Because I never thought about that until another social media content creator had put, I was just grabbing a can of Campbell's soup at the local grocery store. And some lady came up to me and said I was so inspiring. I'm just grocery shopping. I'm just providing food for my family. You know what I mean? So it's that context of how we're doing it, and then how are we being changed by it. So that would be my impetus of, yes, we can use that word, absolutely, but share how that's going to change you and the actions you're going to take. So
take action, right?
Yeah.
Well, I feel like we have taken much more than 2 spoons worth of you today. It was at least 3.
It's all good. They'll come back to me in some way.
But I am so grateful for your time today and for sharing with us. And I think everyone's going to go away with a much better appreciation of where we are societally and the things that we can change to make a difference. So thank you very much for sharing your insights with us.
Yeah, thank you so much for this great interview. Your in-depth knowledge of my story and actually reading my book has been amazing. So thank you so much for treating it with the respect and the dignity that you definitely held it with. So I greatly appreciate
of course.
that.
Before we go, how can people get in touch with you, Jenna?
Yeah,
if
absolutely.
That is your desire.
For sure. So you can find us on our website, aboveandbeyondwithyou.org. It's the letter U, standing for my last name of Udenberg, because nobody can spell that. So, it's all good. And we are on social media, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. And also on our website is the link to my book, Within My Spokes. Currently it's out there in paperback, but in the next few weeks it should be also out in audiobook and hardcover as well. It's already out there in Kindle as well. So wherever you buy books, you can find that. And all proceeds of my memoir go to the work of Above and Beyond with You, creating accessible and inclusive spaces in Minnesota and beyond.
Oh, that's amazing. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Beth. It's been a great morning.
Thanks again, Jenna, for your time and energy. I accept your challenge to not just leave inspired, but also to take action. And I hope my listeners will as well. I encourage you all to share this episode so that others might be educated and inspired too. And today we will leave with the words of Confucius, who says, "The gem cannot be polished without friction, nor perfected without trials." I love you guys. Go out and make it a great day.